Yes.
So on the question of whether Highland used plasma brokers, that's an area that we are going to conduct some further research into, and we will get back to you on that question either in the coming week or so or in November. It might be helpful just to go to what Dr. Kingdon said at CBLA 5011_005, and it's page 5 of that document, please, Sir Nick. This comes with the same caveat as previously stated, that this statement dates from 1990, and it's not clear whether the situation being described is that as of 1990 or for how much before that time. Paragraph 12, please, Sir Nick. What Dr. Kingdon said was, the industrial manufacturers fractionate plasma collected from plasmapheresis centres around the United States. Highland processed plasma collected from plasmapheresis centres owned and operated by Highland throughout the United States, and in addition, a number of independent contractors collect and process plasma under contract in compliance with standards set by Highland. Highland also custom fractionates all fresh frozen plasma collected by the American Red Cross under a plasma fractionation contract. Under that contract, all American Red Cross plasma is fractionated in accordance with the process created by Highland, although it is subsequently marketed and sold under a different name. This arrangement has been in effect since July 1985. Prior to this, American Red Cross plasma was fractionated under contracts with a number of commercial manufacturers. Although the final product was sold as American Red Cross concentrate, the product varied depending on which manufacturer was used to manufacture any particular batch. I take from that American Red Cross plasma was not used in haemophil because that was a product that was marketed under Highland's own name. So it doesn't seem to be...
Well, the American Red Cross plasma would have been plasma collected from voluntary donors, I think.
Yes.
And for the purposes of the Red Cross, which, by current understanding, subject to further evidence, was one of the sources of blood and blood plasma for the American market, the other being blood banks, community blood banks, as well as the commercial fractionators. It doesn't help, really, with the question of contractors.
No.
And it doesn't help with the question of brokers, at least at a time previous to the date at which this was referring to, which was the 1990s, was it?
Well, the statement dates from 1990, but...
Because he appears to be describing what is, i.e. at 1990, as opposed to what was, as to which it doesn't really say very much, except in respect to the American Red Cross arrangements. Have I misunderstood it?
No, I think that's correct. The tense used is Highland processes, present tense, plasma collected from plasmapheresis centres owned and operated by Highland throughout the United States. And in addition, a number of independent contractors collect and process plasma under contract in compliance with standards set by Highland. So as of 1990, there are Highland-owned plants and plants that operate to Highland's standards, and no reference to the third category of plasma brokers. Whether that was the case at earlier points in time is not answered by this statement, but Dr. Kingdon wouldn't necessarily have been addressing that question in the statement. So we have to do further research on it. That is, I read that section merely to remind us of the position that pertained as of 1990, but we don't know that had been the position. The Red Cross plasma is, it seems to me, something of a red herring for this inquiry in its terms of reference.
Well, it may have mattered for the particular case for which he prepared this statement.
Yes, but it doesn't seem to be something that was used in products that was sold in the UK.
No, not so far as we are aware.
Quite. I'd like to turn now, sir, to the question of the use of plasma from outside the United States. Could we have on screen, please, Shumik, PJON 5054_001. This is a document dated the 2nd of February 1979. It is a report of a production visit to two plants, the Lezine plant in Belgium, which, as we've heard, was a Highland fractionation centre, and a Swiss Red Cross plant as well, which I needn't trouble you with. It's Lezine that is of interest to us. The report is produced by C. Chard. At that stage, Dr. Chard was the Scientific Services Manager for Travenol Limited, the UK-based company. He subsequently became the Scientific and Regulatory Affairs Manager for Travenol Limited. Another name that is mentioned in the top left-hand corner is G. Hardy. Dr. Hardy had been Dr. Chard's predecessor as Scientific Services Manager for Travenol Limited. I'm not entirely sure what Dr. Hardy's position was as of February 1979, but he clearly still involved to some extent in the company. The report is distributed to a number of people, including A.W. Barrell, who was the Managing Director of Travenol Limited. And it is marked to be confidential. Before we go through the report, I will just flag up one point. There is reference made to buminate, which is an albumin product that Travenol produced. So it is not a factor 8 concentrate, and I just flag that for when we're going through. The first page in the introduction to the report from Dr. Chard is as follows. The full report of my visit to Lezine and the Swiss Red Cross is attached. The following are key points arising from the report. The Lezine Highland facility does not meet UK requirements for aseptic processing. If Lezine is inspected, imports of Highland products to the UK will probably not be allowed to continue, i.e. buminate 5% and 20% from Lezine are at risk. There is no possibility of importing Lezine-manufactured haemophil made under the present conditions. Our UK licence suggests that plasma originates in the US. In fact, plasma originates from other sources outside the US, e.g. Lesotho and Belize. This information should be submitted to the DHSS, or plasma from these sources should not be used for UK products. If we could turn now to page 3 of the full report. Paragraph 5 contains a little more information about the plasma sourcing. Dr. Chard wrote that the UK licence files refer to US-produced plasma. In fact, plasma was received also from Lesotho and Belize. Plasma from Lesotho was readily visible in the plasma freezer. As this plasma is routinely used for UK product, it is important that either we inform the UK DHSS or discontinue using this plasma. Then paragraph 7, conclusion. If Lezine is inspected, brackets, this is a possibility of a variation to source buminate 5% from Swiss Red Cross is submitted, it is highly likely that the import of all Lezine manufactured Highland product will be stopped until the areas are upgraded. This is a high-risk area for the company and was avoided by the inspectors during their visit only because they were not aware we imported Highland products from Lezine. There is little possibility of a UK inspector allowing Lezine to manufacture haemophil for the UK market. Those are the sections of the report that I wish to highlight, sir. I think it's worth making the point that it appears from the report that the products that were being produced in Lezine and imported to the United Kingdom were albumin products, buminate products, not haemophil. There was clearly some suggestion within the company that Lezine might be used to produce haemophil, and that may or may not be the reason why Dr. Chard was sent out to inspect Lezine. But you will have seen his conclusion that there was little possibility of a UK inspector allowing Lezine to manufacture haemophil for the UK market. We don't know, sir, what steps, if any, were taken in respect of Dr. Chard's comments that the DHSS should be informed about the source of plasma being used.
If we just look at the last sentence on that page, we just go back to it, Shumik. That suggests that you're right, that at that stage, haemophil was not being made in Lezine for the UK market, because otherwise it wouldn't necessarily be framed quite as it is.
There is other evidence, which I haven't troubled you with, that Lezine was used to label the bottles of haemophil that were shipped over from the United States, but they had been, the product itself had been manufactured in the United States, so it was purely an external process that was going on at Lezine at that time.
Yes. So it was sort of a bottling plant, in effect, was it? Or
yes. Placing the labels that were required for the UK product onto it.
I see.
At Lezine. We do have a further document, SHPL 40276_036, which indicates that thought was being given in the company as of 1981, so 2 years after Dr. Chard's report, to the possibility of using Lezine to manufacture haemophil. Could we have on screen, please, Shumik, SHPL 40276_036? This is an internal memorandum. Again, we can see it is from Dr. Chard to a number of other individuals within Travenol, and the reference is from the headed notepaper is from Travenol Laboratories Limited, so the UK company. It says this: the planned inspection of Lezine by DHSS medicines inspectors for approval to source haemophil from Lezine was postponed until September at Lezine's request. We have now officially received confirmation that the haemophil variation will not be approved until an inspection has been carried out. One further document, sir, to bring to your attention on...
Just before we go there, may I just ask, the reference to the Dr. Chard's report shows that it comes from Peter Jones, or relating to Peter Jones.
Yes.
Do we know how it came into his possession?
I don't know that, sir. We can try and find out.
Certainly he makes reference to Lesotho and Belize in a report, which I think you may have showed us yesterday.
Yes. Yes, he does. There is also a reference to Belize in the meeting of February 1984, to which we've made reference before. This is the meeting at NIBSC of officials from the UK, officials from the US, and fractionators, a document to which we will return in some detail at a later stage. But for now, if we could just have PRSE...
And if we go back, just on the same vein, if we go back to the list of places from which plasma comes, which Travenol Limited in Thetford set out, yes. There's no suggestion of any of those centres being situated in Belize or Lesotho?
No. The only one that isn't expressly stated to be in the United States is the Cherry Street centre.
Where you just don't know?
We don't know.
Yes.
If we could have on screen, please, PRSE 0003071. page 5 of that document. The thing that I should add, sir, about the Travenol Limited list of all of the centres is that dates from 1983. Yes. You'll recall from Dr. Kingdon's statement that the use of overseas plasma had ceased circa 1978 and had was no longer being used by the mid-1980s.
Well, that wouldn't fit with the date of this visit to Lucene, would it?
It does and it doesn't, in the sense that it's a 1979 document, but the reference is to plasma from Lesotho being found in the freezer.
Yes.
And my understanding is that plasma, which is significantly, so to speak, out of date, can be used for albumin production in a way that it can't be used for production of other materials. So while that plasma was, according to Dr. Chard, present in Belgium in 1979, it's not clear when that plasma was collected.
No, then that might be so of most fresh frozen plasma, unless there's a date on it.
Yes, Dr. Chard doesn't say anything about the date on which it was collected. There is a document that we'll come to in a second, which refers to a Lesotho plant and when it was closed, which I think was 1976. So if that is correct, then the plasma must have been taken as of 1976 and was still in the deep freeze in Lesine in 1979. I cannot comment on how likely that is. The document that we have on screen, this is from February 1984. As I say, it's this meeting between various fractionators and officials. At the bottom of page 5, we have a contribution from Dr. Ashworth of QATAR, and he described collection procedures at plasmapheresis centres used by the 4 main US companies. And it seems overwhelmingly likely that Highland Travenol would have been included within those 4 major companies. There are some 340 plasmapheresis stations in 42 states, employing 6,000 people. Approximately a third of these centres are owned by the companies, and the rest supply plasma under contract. All plasmapheresis stations in the United States are licensed by the FDA, as is the centre in Belize. Unfortunately, the document doesn't say anything more about what that centre in Belize is. It's also notable that we are dealing with a description of what was being done at that time, February 1984, rather than a historic overview of how plasma had been collected in the past. One final point of note about that last document is that that was a statement that was made in the presence of UK officials and US officials, so there was no effort to hide this centre in Belize. It is referred to expressly. Shumik, please can we have SHPL 40735_006? A document that we will return to at a later stage about the response to the risk of AIDS, but here used just to help us understand the way in which plasma was collected historically. It is dated the 23rd of August 1980. I think that's 1985. Yes, 1985. It is an internal Highland memorandum from the American company, Travenol Laboratories, Inc. In terms of plasma sourcing, it states, we have committed that we will not use plasma from high-risk sources such as prisons or geographic areas which are considered to be high-risk, i.e. San Francisco, Hollywood, and New York City. We do not obtain plasma from third world countries. Lesotho, South Africa, was closed in 1976, our only African plasma centre. The Mexico City plant, which used Mexican-sourced plasma, was closed in 1981. Puerto Rico was closed in 1980. No reference is made here to Belize. It's also important to note that the fact that plasma had previously been obtained from what were described in this document as third world countries doesn't necessarily indicate that that plasma was used in haemophil or any product that was on the UK market. We simply don't know.
Well, what's the document addressing generally under plasma sourcing?
It is entitled Outline of Product Safety Work.
Yes.
I read this document to be part of a wider response as of the 23rd of 1986, a stock taking of where they are on the safety methods that are being used at that time in respect of plasma collection and plasma use.
Yes.
The point there, that this is where I have got the date of 1976 for the closure of Lesotho from. But we can see by comparing that document to Dr. Chard's report that if Lesotho was closed in 1976, there was still frozen plasma in Lezine in 1979. I'm going to turn now to the question of the efforts to recruit donors from gay populations or areas of in which there was a high level of gay donors. In September 1982, Dr. Michael Riddell, who was then the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Quality Control at Travenol, he later moves to Armour, wrote to Harry M. Mayer, the Director of the National Centre for Food, for Drugs and Biologics at the FDA. And this was about the use of plasma that was obtained from the homosexual community. The reference is CGRA 40246, please, Sir Nick. Again, I understand this to be part of the process by which the FDA was seeking to inform itself and seeking to influence the behaviour of pharmaceutical companies as of September 1982 in response to the increasing knowledge of the risk of AIDS. And we'll see a reference to Dr. Donoghue again, who we referred to earlier. What Dr. Riddell said in this letter is, during a recent telephone conversation, Dr. Dennis Donoghue expressed concern existing within the Office of Biologics regarding the use of source plasma, human, obtained through specific recruiting efforts aimed at the homosexual community. Dr. Donoghue requested assurance that such plasma would not be used in the manufacture of anti-haemophilic factor human until the situation regarding acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS, was more clearly defined. Highland Therapeutics Division, Travenol Laboratories Inc., is not engaged in any recruitment programs targeting the homosexual community for plasma that may be used in the production of anti-haemophilic factor human. Consequently, we are able to offer such assurance to you. We do wish to point out, however, that there may be recruiting efforts of this type by organisations collecting whole blood, human, as part of ongoing donor recruitment programs. Since quantities of recovered plasma to be used in fractionation do result from such activities, and fractionators would be unaware of the origin of the plasma, the probability for inclusion of this plasma in routine manufacture does exist. A couple of points to pick up from this document, sir. The first is that the concern about directly seeking to recruit gay donors comes in the context of the fact that gay donors were found to have a high level of hepatitis B antigen in their blood, which was useful in providing vaccination products against hepatitis B. Therefore, that plasma was of use for that specific purpose. Dr. Donohue's concerns, as I read them from this letter, are that donors who were selected for that purpose were also having their plasma used for the general production of factor VIII materials, despite the fact that it would be rich in hepatitis B antigen. Obviously, by September 1982, gay donors were considered to be high risk because of the emergence of AIDS. A point to pick up from the final sentence.
Well, what's interesting about that is I well understand why obtaining plasma from those communities thought to have a greater prevalence of hepatitis B in order to produce a vaccine suitable for use against hepatitis B might, if the same plasma or surplus plasma were then used for other purposes, give rise in that plasma of a greater risk of hepatitis B. But the risk which Dr. Donohue is talking about here in September 1982, 15th of September 82, is the risk of AIDS.
Yes, that's the specific context of this letter.
Yes.
Although, as we will go on to see, there is certainly some criticism that this practice was ever engaged in. We'll come on to the reason as to why. There appears to have been some internal discussion within fractionators around this time, in fact slightly before it, about this issue. And we can see that from an internal memorandum from QATAR, another company, a rival of Highland Travenol. It is at BAUM 608_1, please, Sir Nick. We will come on to deal with QATAR in due course this week, so I won't go into the names. BAUM 608, sorry, not underscore, just page 1 of the document. My mistake. Thank you. I won't go into those names. QATAR is a firm that we will deal with in due course. The opening line gives the context. Dr. Donohue of FDA BOB has asked you, QATAR, to voluntarily exclude plasma collected from known homosexuals from pools used in the production of CoAT and presumably Co9. If we go down to the next paragraph, please. I'm only interested for present purposes in what this tells us about Highland. It says, Highland, brackets Mike Riddell, has had a policy that any plasma collected from a donor having a history of hepatitis, the disease, HBsAg positive, or in close association with others having the disease, are excluded from the use in the manufacture of AHF. Currently, Highland collects plasma from homosexuals for anti-HBs, but does not use it in their fractionation. It is sold to Alpha. Mike has told Donohue that he thinks Highland excludes homosexual plasma from AHF, but he wanted to check their procedures before making a solid voluntary commitment. My guess is that Highland will make the commitment. So, as I say, that precedes the previous document that we have just looked at, and Highland go on to make the commitment.
Precedes? This is the 30th of September.
30th of August.
Of August, I mean. August. Beg your pardon, my fault. Thanks.
The reference, though, when taken together, is that while Highland can say that it doesn't make factor concentrates using blood collected from donors who are recruited because they're gay, there is a reference to it being sold to Alpha. And it's not clear what Alpha then does with the product from this document. If we could go, please, Sir Nick, to CGRA 40655. This is a document dated 9th of December 1982. It is again from Dr. Riddell, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Quality Control at Highland. It is sent to Charles J. Carman, Chairman of the Board, and Dr. Lewis M. Aladort, the Medical Coordinator of the National Haemophilia Foundation. And it's responding to a letter of 2nd of November 1982 on various points. I'm going to turn to the second page of the first paragraph. In this letter, Dr. Riddell says, and I quote, "Within the past several months, we have made a commitment to withhold from AHF manufacture any plasma obtained as a result of specific recruiting activities aimed at the gay community. You are no doubt aware of a significantly greater incidence of high-titered anti-HBs plasma among homosexuals, likely due to close personal contacts with members of that community having clinical hepatitis B infections. Such plasma is of great need in the production of HBIG, that's hepatitis B immune globulin. However, we no longer allow this plasma to enter those pools leading to AHF manufacture." If we go down a couple of paragraphs, it says, "I must point out that we and other manufacturers produce AHF derived from source material other than plasma donations. A significant amount of AHF is derived from recovered plasma resulting from whole blood programs. Since manufacturers do not control the recruiting activities of collectors of whole blood, I cannot comment on the characteristics of their donors other than that they represent the general population." The point from the first paragraph is the way in which the comments are phrased. Firstly, that the commitment is made within the past several months. And second, from the final sentence, that the company no longer allows plasma collected from gay donors to enter pools leading to AHF manufacture. Again, the phrasing is interesting because it doesn't say that Travenol or Highland produces the products from those donors, but there is reference to allowing the plasma to enter pools leading to AHF, anti-haemophilic fraction manufacture.
Just pause a moment. It does seem to suggest, doesn't it, that the Travenol, Highland, is producing AHF derived from source material other than plasma donations. We and other manufacturers, it says.
Sorry, so where is we?
This is the second last paragraph. I must point out that we
yes
produce AHF derived from source material other than plasma donations.
Yes. So the first point is about the use of plasma from gay donors. The second point here is that, yes, in this letter, there is a reference to the fact that Highland have been using plasma which is obtained from as the discarded product from whole blood donations collected by others, and they use that.
And they don't know where it came from? Because they don't control the characteristics of the donors.
Since manufacturers do not control the recruiting activities of collectors of whole blood, I cannot comment on the characteristics of their donors other than they represent the general population.
I'm not sure how that actually follows. because if he accepts they might be recruiting from the population, why would they represent the general population? He doesn't know, does he?
Other than
it's a phrase, but
yes.
It does seem to me that those two comments are slightly contradictory. However,
everybody is in the general population if one defines the general population.
Yes, but I think it's representing the general population would seem to be in the same proportions as the general population. That's the sense of it.
Yes.
If you recruit specific people from within the general population, the result will not be representative of the general population. It'll be unrepresentative.
Yes.
It'll be skewed.
Yes.
So that's why I'm not. It seems to me to be an internally contradictory statement as it's written.
As it's written, yes. The only point I would make is that this is a letter which I am using it for the purpose of looking at the gay population, and this is an extra bit, as it were, about a slightly different.
Well, I think what you've shown me is that the letter is saying we don't target the gay population for the purposes of obtaining plasma which we use for AHF. We don't manufacture AHF from any plasma we get from that source. We can't speak to whether there may be some in other material which we do use because we don't control its collection.
Yes. The other point is that although Highland have within the past several months made that commitment,
yes,
in the past
they were doing it.
Well, they were allowing plasma to enter pools from which concentrate was made.
So they were doing it in the past.
They might not have been making.
They were making no conscious effort to prevent it.
Well, they weren't necessarily making the product. The previous document referred to the fact that and it's a QATAR document providing hearsay evidence of what Highland were doing. That said that currently Highland collects plasma from homosexuals for anti-HBS, anti-surface antigen of hepatitis B.
Well, if we go back to the first paragraph, what it seems to be saying is within the past several months we've made a commitment to withhold from AHF manufacture any plasma obtained as a result of specific recruiting activities aimed at the gay community. You're right, that doesn't say that we were doing it previously. But the last sentence, such plasma is of great need in the production of HBIG. However, we no longer allow this plasma to enter those pools leading to AHF manufacture. In other words, previously they were allowing it to enter the pools.
Yes. But the only issue is whether or not they were the ones who then went on to make that concentrate. It may have been that Highland itself didn't make the concentrate, but sold the plasma to Alpha, who then went on to make the concentrates.
I see.
That is what the memorandum from QATAR would imply. But that, of course, is hearsay evidence about what Highland were doing.
Right.
The phrasing of this is interesting in that it doesn't say, if one looks at that last sentence, after the semicolon, it doesn't say, however, we no longer allow this plasma to be used by us to make a concentrate. It refers to we no longer allow this plasma to enter those pools leading to AHF manufacture.
So this first paragraph is capable of covering both self-production and selling on to Alpha.
Yes. It could be either.
Yes.
It's only when you combine it with the previous document with QATAR that perhaps the wording that is used here takes on a particular resonance.
And it may or may not be that QATAR is describing what then happened with the excess plasma which Highland weren't using, Travenol weren't using for their own purposes.
Yes, the document of the 30th of August 1982, the QATAR document, says currently Highland collects plasma from homosexuals for anti-HBS but does not use it in their fractionation. It is sold to Alpha. So that's describing a situation as of August 1982. Yes. This memorandum, or this letter, sorry, from December 1982.
Later on, and so it may be saying we stopped selling on to Alpha.
Within the past several months, we have made a commitment to withhold from AHF manufacture, etc., etc.
Yes, thank you. I've got there.
Another point to make about this letter is that it describes no longer allowing plasma to enter the pools leading to AHF concentrate. So that plasma is no longer going to go into those pools. It doesn't say what is happening to such plasma that is already in the pools. You'll recall, of course, Dr. Kingdon's evidence about how it could take 6 months to a year before a donation appeared in a factor concentrate. And at one point when talking about HIV testing for the plasma donations, he refers to it being 2 years between the step being introduced and products still being on the shelf because of the product's shelf life. I mentioned earlier, so there was a criticism of the practice as a whole. If we look at CGRA 40404, this is a supplemental expert witness report of Dr. Donald Francis, MD, DSC. This is part of US litigation, and it should be borne in mind that this is an expert report on behalf of the plaintiffs in that litigation. Dr. Francis says, of the first paragraph of this witness report, I'm a physician specializing in epidemiology and virology. For over 20 years, I was employed by the United States Center for Disease Control. I won't go through the rest of his career there. If we could go, please, to the next page, paragraph 4. What Dr. Francis says is this. Defendants, he is talking about the fact that he has learnt that defendants QATAR and Baxter collected plasma from urban homosexual men for hepatitis B and immunoglobulin, HBIG, production, and used that plasma, that same plasma, in the manufacture of factor 8 and factor 9 concentrates. That is the factual premise upon which his comments are based. Of course, Dr. Francis himself can't speak to whether that was done. That is the basis on which he makes these comments. He says, defendants could not have selected a higher risk population for transmission of AIDS than hepatitis B positive urban homosexual men. These donors were infected with hepatitis B in direct correlation to their number of sexual partners. Those at highest risk of hepatitis B were also at the highest risk for all other sexually transmitted diseases, including AIDS. By the mid-1970s, it was well known to defendants and the scientific community that urban homosexual men had an exceptionally high prevalence of hepatitis B. The population provided a source of plasma with high titers of hepatitis B antibodies, which defendants used for the manufacture of HBIG, a product prescribed to create passive immunity to hepatitis B. By the same time, it was also well known that a substantial portion of this population engaged in a lifestyle of sexual promiscuity involving multiple partners, which caused widespread sexually transmitted diseases, including not only hepatitis B, but also hepatitis C, then unidentified and described as non-A, non-B, or NANB hepatitis, cytomegalovirus, CMV, and Epstein-Barr disease. Thus, the same conduct that made urban homosexual men valuable HBIG plasma donors caused multiple other diseases that made this population inappropriate donors for any other blood or plasma product. That was the view of Dr. Francis. Of course, the litigation will have heard other evidence from other witnesses as well. That's all I'm going to say about donors and Highland Travenol at this point. It leads to the final selection of documents. This is something of a smorgasbord of documents from various sources showing some of the communication that Highland Travenol had with the United Kingdom and clinicians and government at various times. So I'm afraid we'll be hopping around a bit. But there are some documents which may be of interest within this selection. If we could begin, please, Sir Nick, with CBLA 305720. We can see from the top of this document that it's a memorandum sent from Dr. Bidwell to Dr. Maycock, Dr. Bidwell of the Protein Fractionation Laboratory in Oxford, to Dr. Maycock, who, among the other hats that he wore, was the director of BPL at the time. The date is the 23rd of May, 1975. The context, as I read the document, is the outbreak of hepatitis that has been reported by Dr. Krask in respect of the use of factor concentrates, and in particular haemophil. And we saw in the World in Action documentary, Dr. Krask, I'm not sure if we showed it on Friday, but we've seen it before, Dr. Krask talking about the outbreak and the fact that it is linked to haemophil. And at the time, the documentary was broadcast in December, but obviously Dr. Krask was well aware of the outbreak before that. There were 58 cases, Dr. Krask said, of hepatitis in people with haemophilia. In his Lancet article, which is published in August 1975, so published after this memo is produced, but obviously Dr. Krask was well aware of the situation before that. The Lancet article is at PRSE 0001794, and it refers to the outbreak taking place between April and June 1974. That is the context. What Dr. Bidwell says is that Dr. Ritzer has just told me that Dr. Josephson, who was the medical director of Travenol, is coming to the UK on Monday the 9th of June. They are concerned about the reports of hepatitis associated with the Highland product, and if invited to do so, I will join in the discussion in Dr. Ritzer's office. There is a meeting to be organised by Travenol on the 10th, when others involved in the story of hepatitis associated with the Highland product will be present. This will probably be held in London, and Dr. Ritzer thinks that he should go, and hopefully we may find out any conclusions. If we can now turn, please, to OXUH 301590_001. We can see a note of that meeting, which was produced by Dr. Cleghorn of the National Blood Transfusion Service. The note is marked to be confidential, and it states this: on the 10th of June last, I chaired an informal meeting at which we discussed the problem of hepatitis following the administration of AHG concentrates. A list of those attending is attached. Dr. Krask presented the results of his epidemiological survey, and there was further comment on the virological aspects by Dr. Bantavler and Dane, Doctors Bantavler and Dane. It was clear that not only identifiable hepatitis B was involved, but also presumptive A and or other varieties. Dr. Josephson, on behalf of Travenol Laboratories, stated that the incident of hepatitis B was explained by manufacture of stockpiled plasma, the donors of which had been screened only by CEP. He suggested that it was unlikely that the problem was confined to haemophil, and events subsequently have shown this to be true, at least in respect of cryobuline. After considerable discussion, it was agreed that while we would expect a drop in cases of hepatitis B as material screened by HA and RIA techniques came through, the problem of non-B hepatitis would remain. The attendance list of the meeting, if we could have this on screen, please, Shumik, is NHBT 0101337_008. We can see those present included Dr. Rogers, Dr. Stern, Professor Ingram, Dr. Peter Jones, Dr. James, Dr. Stapleforth, Dr. Krask, Dr. Dane. I pause there to note that that is the doctor whose correspondence we looked at last week about immuno and hepatitis. Dr. Banatvala, Dr. Josephson from Travenol, Dr. Cleghorn, who made the note, Mr. Pugh from Travenol, Mr. Mee from Travenol. Those are both from Travenol Limited, the UK company. Dr. Johnson, we can see, is from Travenol International, the American company. Mr. De Vrecker, again from the international company, did not attend the meeting. Dr. Ritzer and Dr. Bloom, and you'll recall from the note made by Dr. Bidwell that there may have been a separate meeting with Dr. Ritzer in Oxford.
Could you just go back to the page before, please? And before.
The note is at OXUH 30.
No, the page before this, same document.
That is the first page of this document.
Oh, but so it would be OXUH 301590-001. Thank you. I just want to understand what's being said in the second last paragraph there, because I note that Dr. Dane has given an agreement
I understand this
to a number of people in the pool.
I understand this to be a reference to, in fact, what we have just been talking about, using pooled plasma with high hepatitis B antigen levels as a way of creating a product which can then be used as essentially as a vaccine to try to prevent infection. I see. And so here, perhaps counterintuitively, the suggestion was originally you need a pool of 30 such donors to be able to make an effective product. Dr. Dane says he would rather have a pool which is nearer to 100, but people think that that was impracticable.
Yes, I see.
So
thank you.
A slightly different issue.
Thank you.
If we can turn, please, now, Shumik, to SHPL 40276_141. The next three documents are, in effect, a worked example of an adverse reaction being noted. We can see that the first document is from Professor Ingram at St Thomas's Hospital, dated the 25th of November 1975. It is sent to Dr. Hardy, then the Scientific Services Manager at Travenol Limited. Dr. Hardy was one of the names that was copied into Dr. Chard's report on the Lacine facility. Professor Ingram is writing to Dr. Hardy to inform him that a patient, name is given, has received a quantity of haemophil, has developed jaundice. And the record of the haemophil received is given. It's noted that that patient has received other blood products between the 5th of August and the 17th of November. And then details are given of the jaundice which has been found. SHPL 40276_138, please, Shumik. 4th of December 1975, Dr. Hardy writing to the DHSS, enclosing the correspondence between Professor Ingram and himself, which refers to a case of jaundice that occurred whilst the patient was receiving haemophil and other blood products. And so we can see that that is being notified to the DHSS by the company. And if we could have SHPL 40276_140. Dr. Hardy, of course, referred to correspondence, not just a letter from Professor Ingram, but correspondence, and it's fair to say that this implied his reply as well, which is also dated the 4th of December 1975, which thanks Professor Ingram for the letter, notes that the patient did receive other blood products during the time in which the jaundice developed, and says that with regard to the haemophil batches quoted in your letter, I can tell you that batch number, he gives the number, is in fact the same batch of concentrate as batch number, he gives the other number as well. There seems to have been a mistake in labelling, in that one had the US product label and the other had the UK product label. I can confirm that both the final product and all the plasma used in the manufacture of this haemophil was tested by the radioimmune assay technique for hepatitis B antigen, both by Highland laboratories and, in the case of the final product, by the Division of Biological Standards Laboratories in Hampstead. So the product has been tested. I think it's implied in the letter, although not stated, that the results of those tests were negative, because otherwise the product would not have been used. We can see that this case of hepatitis has been reported both to the company and to the DHSS, but as so often in these cases, the patient has been using multiple blood products, and the tests which have been conducted on the donations and the final product as of 1975, there is a question as to how sensitive those tests were. Turning to a separate subject, and that is correspondence with the government in and around 1979 about the possibility of Travenol becoming involved in fractionation within the United Kingdom. So not just importing the products, but producing them commercially within the UK as well. An internal DHSS note records that in or around 1979, Travenol approached the then Parliamentary Undersecretary of State at the DHSS, Eric Deakins, to discuss the possibility of setting up a fractionation plant in the United Kingdom. Travenol were one of 3 commercial companies who are said in this note to have been interested in this. The others appear to have been QATAR and the Swedish company Cadbury. That's KABRI. The references are DHSC 303743_131 and DHSC 302313_054. A meeting of officials and Mr. Deakins took place to discuss the Travenol proposal on the 29th of January 1979. If we could have on screen, please, DHSC 302313_055. We can see the date of the meeting is in the top line. Present of a Parliamentary Undersecretary of State, Mr. Breckin, Mr. Dutton, Mr. Harley, Mr. Jones, and Dr. Waiter. Dr. Waiter, I understand to have been the predecessor of Dr. Walford in the position of a medical officer within the DHSS. Mr. Dutton is a name that regularly is seen on these papers at this time as well, also working within the same section of the DHSS, as was Mr. Harley. Paragraph 1, it says, it was established that Travenol's proposals would probably be to process blood plasma donated by volunteers in Britain and provide the NHS with its factor 8 requirement at no cost. However, Travenol would doubtless then wish to extract albumin and other remaining components and sell them at considerable profit. Whilst the haemophilia lobby was very strongly pressing for increased production of factor 8, there were a number of drawbacks to the proposal. It was felt that volunteer donors would react strongly against any attempt to use donated blood commercially. It might lead to increased pressure to collect plasma only from donors. It might lead to increased pressure to collect plasma only from donors, as opposed to plasma and blood. But this practice, which is common in the United States, was still very controversial and in some respects ethically questionable. Although factor VIII was the main component of interest to the NHS, there were some 20 derivatives from blood plasma, and the extent of their use and cost in the NHS was not known. Inquiries were being made about the use of these products in the NHS, and a decision on the possibilities for the collaboration could not effectively be made until the results were available. It was agreed that officials should meet Travenol's representatives to discuss their proposal in more depth. It was felt that the only real scope for cooperation at the moment would be if they processed the blood plasma collected by the NBTS and were paid for doing so, but returned all the products to the NHS. This would probably lower their unit costs a little and afford them the prestige of supplying the NHS. The Parliamentary Under-Secretary would wish to be kept informed of the outcome of the meeting. The date of the note is 1st of February 1979. Fair to say, so, that this is very much then at an early stage in the discussions between Travenol and the DHSS. Worth noting, though, that these discussions are taking place in January 1979, so that is at the tail end of the Callaghan government rather than the Thatcher government. Also, before Dr. Walford was in post. We picked up the story from when Dr. Walford came to post. The meeting between Travenol and DHSS officials took place on the 19th of March 1979. The reference for it is DHSC 5047. I won't take you to it, sir. It's fair to say that there were some exploratory discussions about the way in which Travenol could either work in partnership with BPL or manufacture a plant on its own. The question of whether Travenol would need to import plasma. Travenol saying that it would in order to make the prospect viable. And the need then to ensure that a distinction was drawn between NHS plasma and imported plasma. Those were the types of issues that were discussed. Mr. Deakins was kept informed of that meeting in a minute, which was dated DHSC 00023130_057. Mr. Harley proposed that further work had to be done and further information gathered before any subsequent decisions were taken. And a somewhat non-committal letter was drafted in response to Travenol, and that is DHSC 00023130_058. July 1979 saw the election of the Thatcher government, and Dr. Vaughan became the Minister of State for Health. In an internal minute, he noted that Travenol were said to have put a collaboration scheme to us, which was not pursued. That's what was written in the minute. That's DHSC 00023130_010. And so you see Dr. Vaughan showing an interest in the proposal that has been made and seeking to obtain further information about it. The response of the civil servants to that, which is at DHSC 302313_012, is to place it within the wider context of a discussion that was then ongoing about the future of BPL, the role, if any, of a commercial partner to BPL. And we can see that the issue then gets subsumed within that wider discussion. We can see Mr. Burrell, the managing director, writing to Dr. Vaughan on the 13th of February 1980, DHSC 40858, in which he seeks to encourage further engagement with the company. And again, it seems that there was some debate about how that letter should be replied to, but some civil servants suggesting in marginalia that the reply should be made, and I quote, rather more non-committal. That is the same reference. And that's, as we know, nothing ultimately came of commercial involvement within fractionation of the UK, and a relatively early decision was taken that if there were to be any commercial involvement, it should be with a British company. Travenol the international branch of Travenol, which would be the one who were required to be involved, obviously did not meet that description. I note in passing, sir, that Mr. Burrell in 1984 wrote a number of letters to Lord Glenarthur and to individuals within the DHSS, which we discussed during Lord Glenarthur's evidence. Finally, from Mr. Burrell, the reference I misplaced that reference for a moment. Yes, so the reference is DHSC 0026448 and DHSC 0032854. I don't ask for these documents to be brought up, but these are letters from Mr. Burrell to the Superintendent of the Medicines Inspectorate at the DHSS and to John McGregor MP, who appears to have been the local MP for Mr. Burrell and or Travenol Limited. And these were complaints that BPL was being held to a lesser standard than commercial firms. He complained about dual standards and contrasted the most rigorous standards required of commercial companies with the position of BPL. This is in the context of the Critical Medicines Inspectorate report and indeed a critical 1981 World in Action documentary. The final document in respect of Highland and Travenol is HSOC 0029671_046. This is a Haemophilia Society document of a meeting dated the 12th of February 1976, in which the Society have received confirmation from Travenol Laboratories that they will provide some help to the Society, but the committee were, and I quote, very disappointed to learn that it was far less than they had originally been led to believe. Travenol were paying for the printing and mailing of the programme and registration forms for the Congress, the printing and mailing of the first issue of the New Style News Bulletin, and the provision of treatment materials to be used during the Society's Congress. It was agreed to accept those offers, but as I say, some disappointment expressed about the level of support that was being offered by Highland Travenol at that time. That concludes the presentation on Highland Travenol. As I say, the presentation on Immuno is distinct because they were separate companies at the time, although they've been dealt with together in this section of the timetable. There are, of course, a number of loose ends which we've identified during the course of this presentation, which we will come back to in due course.
Yes, well, thank you very much. We'll take a break then, now and until 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock.